Hello and welcome to day 19 of A Year with Aquinas, where we are reading his Summa Theologica in a year. We are continuing today in the first part, question 25, the power of God. You can follow along with me on newadvent.org/summa. Article 3, whether God is omnipotent. Objection 1. It seems that God is not omnipotent, for movement and passiveness belong to everything, but this is impossible in God. For he is immovable, as I said above. Therefore, he is not omnipotent. Reply to objection 1. God is said to be omnipotent in respect to his active power, not to the passive power, as was shown above. Whence the fact that he is immovable or impassible is not repugnant to his omnipotence. Objection 2. Further, sin is an act of some kind, but God cannot sin nor deny himself, as was said in 2 Timothy 2:13. Therefore, God is not omnipotent. Reply to objection 2. To sin is to fall short of a perfect action. Hence, to be able to sin is to be able to fall short in action, which is repugnant to omnipotence. Therefore, it is said that God cannot sin because of his omnipotence. Nevertheless, the philosopher says that God can deliberately do what is evil, but this must be understood either on a condition that the antecedent of which is impossible, as, for instance, if we were to say that God can do evil things if he will, for there is no reason why a conditional proposal could not or should not be true, though both the antecedent and the consequent are impossible, as if one were to say, if man is a donkey, he has 4 feet. Or he may be understood to mean that God can do some things which now seem to be evil, which, however, if he did them, would be good then. Or he is perhaps speaking after the common manner of the heathen, who thought that men became gods like Jupiter or Mercury. Objection 3. Further, it is said of God that he manifests his omnipotence, especially by sparing and having mercy, end quote, the collect of the 10th Sunday after Pentecost. Therefore, the greatest act possible to divine power is to spare and have mercy. There are things much greater, however, than sparing and having mercy. For example, to create another world, and the like. Therefore, God is not omnipotent. Reply to objection 3. God's omnipotence is shown particularly in sparing and having mercy, because in this has been made manifest that God has supreme power, that he freely forgives sins, for it is not for one who is bound by laws of a superior to forgive of his own free will, or because by sparing and having mercy upon men, he leads them to the participation of an infinite good, which is the ultimate effect of the divine power, or because, as I said above, the effect of divine mercy is the foundation of all the divine works. For nothing is due to anyone except on account of something already given him gratuitously by God. In this way, the divine omnipotence is particularly made manifest, because to it pertains the first foundations of all good things. Objection 4. Further, upon the text, quote, God hath made foolish the wisdom of this world, end quote, 1 Corinthians 1:20. A gloss says, quote, God hath made the wisdom of this world foolish, by showing those things to be possible which it judges to be impossible, end quote. Whence it would seem that nothing is to be judged possible or impossible in reference to inferior causes, as the wisdom of this world judges them, but in reference to the divine power. If then God were omnipotent, all things would be possible, nothing therefore impossible. But if we take away the impossibility, then we also destroy the necessary, for what necessarily exists is impossible not to exist. Therefore, there would be nothing at all that is necessary if things in God were omnipotent. But this is an impossibility. Therefore, God is not omnipotent. Reply to objection 4. The absolute possible is not so called in reference to either higher causes or to inferior causes, but in reference to itself. But the possible in reference to some power is named possible in reference to its proximate cause. Hence, those things which belong to God alone do to immediately, as for example, to create, to justify, and the like, are said to be possible in reference to a higher cause. Those things, however, which are of such a kind as to be done by an inferior cause, are said to be possible in reference to those inferior causes. For it is according to the condition of the proximate causes that the effect has a contingent or necessity, as was shown above. Thus, it is that wisdom of this world is deemed foolish, because what is impossible to nature, it judges to be impossible to God. So it is clear that the omnipotence of God does not take away from things that are impossibility and necessity. On the contrary, it is said, quote, "No word shall be impossible with God," end quote. Luke 1:37. I answer that all confess that God is omnipotent, but it seems difficult to explain in what ways his omnipotence precisely consists, for there may be doubt as to the precise meaning of the word all when we say that God can do all things. If, however, we consider the matter aright, since power is said in reference to possible things, this phrase, quote, "God can do all things," end quote, is rightly understood to mean that God can do all things that are possible, and for this reason, he is said to be omnipotent. Now, according to the philosopher, a thing is said to be possible in two ways. First, in relation to some power. Thus, whatever is subject to human power is said to be possible to man. Secondly, absolutely on account of relation in which the very terms stand to each other. Now, God cannot be said to be omnipotent through being able to do all things that are possible to create nature, for the divine power extends further than that. If, however, we were to say that God is omnipotent because he can do all things that are possible to his power, there would be a vicious circle in explaining the nature of his power. For this would be saying nothing else but God is omnipotent, because he can do all things that he is able to do. It remains, therefore, that God is called omnipotent because he can do all things that are possible absolutely, which is the second way of saying a thing is possible. For a thing is said to be possible or impossible absolutely, according to the relation in which the very terms stand to one another. Possible if the predicate is not incompatible with the subject, as that Socrates sits, and absolutely impossible when the predicate is altogether incompatible with the subject, as for instance, that man is a donkey. It must, however, be remembered that since every agent produces an effect like itself, to each active power there corresponds a thing possible as its proper object according to the nature of that act on which its active power is founded. For instance, the power of giving warmth is related to its proper object to the being capable of being warmed. The divine essence, however, upon which the nature of the power of God is founded, is infinite, and is not limited by any genus of being, but possesses within itself the perfection of all being, whence whatsoever has or can have that nature of being, is numbered among the absolute possible things, in respect of which God is called omnipotent. Now nothing is opposed to the idea of being except non-being. Therefore, that which implies being and non-being at the same time is repugnant to the idea of an absolutely possible thing, within the scope of the divine omnipotence. For such a thing cannot come under the divine omnipotence, not because any defect in the power of God, but because it has not the nature of a feasible or a possible thing. Therefore, everything that does not imply a contradiction in terms is numbered amongst those possible things in respect to which God is called omnipotent, whereas whatever implies contradiction does not come in within the scope of divine omnipotence, because it cannot have the aspect of possibility. Hence, it is better to say that such a thing cannot be done than God cannot do them. Nor is this contrary to the words of the angel, saying, quote, "No word shall be impossible with God," end quote. For whatever implies a contradiction cannot be a word, because no intellect can possibly conceive such a thing. Article 4. Whether God can make the past not to have been. Objection 1. It seems that God can make the past not to have been. For what is impossible in itself is much more impossible than what is only impossible accidentally. But God can do what is impossible in itself, as to give sight to the blind or raise the dead. Therefore, he can do and much more can he do what is only impossible accidentally. Now, for the past is not to have been impossible accidentally. Thus, for Socrates not to be running is accidentally impossible, from the fact that his running is a thing of the past. Therefore, God can make the past not to have been. Reply to objection 1. Although it is impossible accidentally for the past not to have been, if one considers the past thing itself, as for instance, the running of Socrates, nevertheless, if that past thing is considered as past, that it should not have been impossible, not only in itself, but absolutely necessary, since it implies a contradiction. Thus, it is more impossible than the raising of the dead, in which there is nothing contradictory, because this is reckoned impossible in reference to some power, that is to say, some natural power. For such impossible things do come beneath the scope of the divine power. Objection 2. Further, what God could do, he can do now, since all his power is not lessened. But God could have effected before Socrates ran that he would not run. Therefore, when he has run, God could effect that he did not run. Reply to objection 2. As God, in accordance with the perfection of the divine power, can do all things, and yet some things are not subject to his power, because they fall short of being possible, so also if we regard the immutability of the divine power, whatever God could do, he can do now. Now, some things, however, at one time were in the nature of possibility, whilst they were not yet to be done, which now fall short of the nature of possibility when they have been done. So God is said not to be able to do them, because they themselves cannot be done. Objection 3. Further, charity is a more excellent virtue than virginity, but God can supply charity that is lost. Therefore, also lost virginity. Therefore, he can also effect what was corrupted shall not have been corrupt. Reply to objection 3. God can remove all corruption from the mind and from a body of a woman who has fallen, but the fact that she has been corrupted cannot be removed from her, as it is also impossible that the fact of having sinned or having lost charity can thereby be removed from the sinner. On the contrary, Jerome says, quote, although God can do all things, he cannot make a thing that is corrupt not to have been corrupted. End quote. Therefore, for the same reason, he cannot affect anything else which is in the past that should not have been. I answer that, as said above, therefore does not fall under the scope of God's omnipotence, anything that implies a contradiction. Now, that the past should not have been implies a contradiction, for as it implies a contradiction to say that Socrates is sitting and is not sitting, so is to say that he sat and he did not sit. But to say that he did sit is to say that it happened in the past. To say that he did not sit is to say that it did not happen in the past. Whence that the past should not have been does not come under the scope of the divine power. This is what Augustine means when he says, quote, whosoever says, if God is almighty, let him make what is done as if it were not done, does not see that this is to say, if God is almighty, let him effect that what is true, by the very fact that it is true, be false. End quote. And the philosopher says, quote, of this one thing alone God is deprived, namely to make undone the things that have been done. End quote. Article 5. Whether God can do what he does not. Objection 1. It seems that God cannot do other than what he does. For God cannot do what he has not foreknown and preordained that he would do. But he neither foreknew nor preordained that he would do anything except what he does. Therefore, he cannot do except what he does. Reply to objection 1. In ourselves, in whom power and essence are distinct from will and intellect, and again from intellect from wisdom, and will from justice, there can be something in the power which is not in the just will nor in the wise intellect. But in God, power and essence, will and intellect, wisdom and justice are one and the same. Whence there can be nothing in the divine power which cannot also be in his just will or his wise intellect. Nevertheless, because his will cannot be determined from necessity to do this or that order of things, except upon supposition, as said above, neither are the wisdom and justice of God restricted to this present order, as was shown above. So nothing prevents there being something divine power which he does not will, and is not included in the order of things which he has placed. Again, because power is considered as executing, and the will is commanding, and the intellect and wisdom as directing, what is attributed to his power, considered in itself, God is said to be able to do in accordance with his absolute power. Of such a kind is everything which has the nature of being, as was said above. What is, however, attributed to the divine power, according as it carries into execution the commands of a just will, God is said to be able to do by his ordinary power. In this manner, we must say that God can do other things by his absolute power than he has foreknown and preordained that he would do. But it could not happen that he should do anything which he does not foreknow and had not preordained that he would do, because his actual doing is subject to his foreknowledge and preordination. Through his power, which is his nature, is not so. For God does things because he wills to do so, yet the power to do them does not come from his will, but from his nature. Objection 2. Further, God can only do what ought to be done, and what is right to be done. But God is not bound to do what he does not, nor is it right that he should do what he does not. Therefore, he cannot do except what he does. Reply to objection 2. God is bound to nobody but himself. Hence, it is said that God can only do what he ought. Nothing else is meant by this than that God can do nothing but what is befitting to himself and just. But these words, befitting and just, may be understood in two ways. One, in directed connection with the verb is, and thus they would be restricted to the present order of things, and would concern his power. Then, what is said of the objection is false. For the sense is that God can do nothing except what is now fitting and just. If, however, they be joined directly with the verb can, and then secondarily with is, the present will be signified, but in a confused and general way. The sentence would be, in the true sense, quote, God cannot do anything except that which, if he did it, would be suitable and just, end quote. Objection 3. Further, God cannot do anything that is not good and befitting creation, but it is not good for creatures nor befitting them to be likewise then as they are. Therefore, God cannot do except what he does. Reply to objection 3. Although this order of things be restricted to what now exists, the divine power and wisdom are not restricted thus. Whence, although no other order would be suitable and good to the things which are now, yet God can do other things and impose upon them another order. On the contrary, it is written, quote, Thinkest thou that I cannot ask my Father, and he will present me more than 12 legions of angels? End quote. Matthew 26:53. But he neither asked for them, nor did his Father show them to refute the Jews. Therefore, God can do what he does not. I'll answer that. In this matter, certain persons erred in two ways. Some laid it down that God acts from natural necessity, in such a way as from the action of nature nothing else can happen beyond what actually takes place, as, for instance, from the seed of man a man must come, and that from an olive, and so on. The divine operation there could not result other things, nor another order of things than that which is now. But this we showed above, that God does not act from natural necessity, but that his will is the cause of all things, nor is that will naturally from any necessity determined to those things. Whence in no way at all is the present course of events produced by God from any necessity, so that other things could not happen. Others, however, have said that the divine power is restricted to this present course of events through the order of the divine wisdom and justice, without which God does nothing. But since the power of God, which is his essence, is nothing else but his wisdom, it can indeed fittingly be said that there is nothing in the divine power which is not in the order of the divine wisdom. For the divine wisdom includes the whole potency of divine power. Yet the order placed in creation by divine wisdom, in which the notion of his justice consists, as said above, is not so adequate to the divine wisdom that the divine wisdom should be restricted to this present order of things. Now it is clear that the whole idea of order in which a man puts into things made by him is taken from their end. So when the end is proportionate to the things made for that end, the wisdom of the maker is restricted to some definite order. But the divine goodness is an end exceeding beyond all proportion beyond proportion all created things. Whence the divine wisdom is not so restricted to any particular order that no other course of events could happen. Wherefore, we must simply say that God can do other things than those he has done. Article 6. Whether God can do better than what he does. Objection 1. It seems that God cannot do better than he does. For whatever God does, he does in a most powerful and wise way. But a thing is so much better done as it is more powerful and more wisely done. Therefore, God cannot do anything better than he does. Reply to objection 1. When it is said that God can make a thing better than he makes it, if better is taken substantively, this proportion is true. For he can always make something better than each individual thing, and if he can make the same thing in one way better than it is, and in another way was not, as explained above. If, however, better is taken as an adverb, implying the manner of the making, thus God cannot make anything better than he makes it, because he cannot make it from greater wisdom and goodness. But if it implies the manner of things done, he can make something better, because he can give to the things made by him a better manner of existence as regards the accidents, although not regards the substance. Objection 2. Further, Augustine argues, quote, if God could, but would not, beget a son his equal, he would have been envious, end quote. For the same reason, if God could have made things better than he did, but was not willing to do so, he would have been envious. But envy is far removed from God. Therefore, God makes everything of the best. He cannot therefore make anything better than he does. Reply to objection 2. It is of the nature of a son that he should be equal to his father when he comes to maturity, but it is not of the nature of anything created that it should be better than it was made by God. Hence the comparison fails. Objection 3. Further, what is very good and the best of all cannot be bettered, because nothing is better than the best. But as Augustine says, quote, each thing that God has made is good, and then all together they are very good, because in them consists the wondrous beauty of the universe, end quote. Therefore the good in the universe could not be made better by God. Reply to objection 3. The universe, the present creation being supposed, can neither be better on account of the most beautiful order given to things by God, in which the good of the universe consists. For if any one thing were bettered, the proportion of order would be destroyed. As if one string were stretched more than it ought to, the melody of the harp would be destroyed. Yet God could make other things, or add something to the present creation, and then there would be another and better universe. Objection 4. Further, Christ as a man is full of grace and truth, and has the Spirit without measure, and so he cannot be any better. Again, created happiness is described as the highest good, and thus cannot be any better. And the Blessed Virgin Mary is raised above all the choirs of angels, and so cannot be any better than she is. God cannot therefore make all things better than he has made them. Reply to Article 4. The humanity of Christ, from the fact that is united to the Godhead, and the created happiness from the fact that is the fruition of God, and the Blessed Virgin from the fact that she is the Mother of God, have all a certain infinity of dignity from the infinite good, which is God. And on this account, there cannot be anything better than these, just as there cannot be anything better than God. On the contrary, it is written, quote, God is able to do all things more abundantly than we desire or understand, end quote. Ephesians 3:20. I answer that. The goodness of anything is twofold. One, which is of the essence of it. Thus, for instance, to be rational pertains to the essence of man. As regards this good, God cannot make anything better than itself, although he can make another thing better than it, even as he cannot make the number of 4 greater than it is, because if it were greater, it would no longer be 4, but another number. For the addition of substantial differences in definitions is after the manner of the addition of unity of numbers. Another kind of goodness is that which is over and above the essence. Thus, the good of man is to be virtuous or wise, As regards this kind of goodness, God can make things better than he has made. Absolutely speaking, however, God can make something else better than each thing made by him. Question 26. The Divine Beatitude. Article 1. Whether beatitude belongs to God. Objection 1. It seems that beatitude does not belong to God. For beatitude, according to Boethius, quote, is a state made perfect by the aggregation of all good things, end quote. But the aggregation of goods has no place in God, nor has composition. Therefore, beatitude does not belong to God. Reply to objection 1. Aggregation of good is in God, after the manner not of composition, but of simplicity. For those things which in creatures is manifold pre-exist in God, as was said above, in simplicity and in unity. Objection 2. Further, beatitude or happiness is the reward according to the philosopher, but reward does not apply to God, and neither does merit. Therefore, neither does beatitude. Reply to objection 2. It belongs as an accident to beatitude or happiness to be the reward of a virtue, so far as anyone attains beatitude, even as to be the term of generation belongs accidentally to being, so far as it passes from potentiality to act. As then, God has being, though not begotten, so he has a beatitude, although not acquired by merit. On the contrary, the Apostle says, quote, which in his times shall show who is the blessed and only Almighty, the King of kings and Lord of lords, end quote. 1 Timothy 6:5. I answer that. The beatitude belongs to God in a very special manner, for nothing else is understood to be meant by the term beatitude than the perfect good of an intellectual nature, which is capable of knowing that which it has, a sufficiency of good which it possesses, to which is the competent that good or ill may befall, and which can control its own actions. All of these things belong in a most excellent manner to God, namely to be perfect and possess intelligence, whence beatitude belongs to God in the highest degree. Article 2. Whether God is called blessed in respect of his intellect. Objection 1. It seems that God is not called blessed in respect to his intellect, for the beatitude is in the highest good. But good is said to be in God in regards to his essence, because good has reference to being, which is according to essence, according to Boethius. Therefore, beatitude also is said to be in God in regards to his essence, and not to his intellect. Reply to objection 1. This argument proves that beatitude belongs to God, not that beatitude pertains essentially to him under the aspect of his essence, but rather that under the aspect of his intellect. Objection 2. Further, beatitude implies the notion of end. Now the end is the object of the will, as also is the good. Therefore, beatitude is said to be in God with reference to his will, and not reference to his intellect. Reply to objection 2. Since beatitude is a good, it is the object of the will. Now the object is understood as the prior to the act of the will, whence in our manner of understanding, divine beatitude precedes the act of the will at rest in it. This cannot be other than the act of the intellect, and thus beatitude is to be found in an act of the intellect. On the contrary, Gregory says, quote, he is in glory, who whilst he rejoices in himself, needs not further praise, end quote. To be in glory, however, is the same as to be blessed. Therefore, since we enjoy God in respect to our intellect, because, quote, the vision is the whole of the reward, end quote, as Augustine says, it would seem that beatitude is to be in God in respect of his intellect. Article 3. Whether God is the beatitude of each of the blessed. Objection 1. It seems that God is the beatitude of each of the blessed, for God is the supreme good, as was said above, but it is quite impossible that there should be many supreme goods, as is also clear from what has been said above. Therefore, since it is in the essence of the beatitude that it should be the supreme good, it seems that the beatitude is nothing else but God himself. Reply to objection 1. Beatitude, as regards its object, is the supreme good absolutely, but as regard its act in beatified creatures, it is the supreme good, not absolutely, but in the kind of goods which a creature can participate. Objection 2. Further, beatitude is the last end of the rational nature, but to the last end of the rational nature belongs only to God. Rather, to be the last end of the rational nature belongs only to God. Therefore, the beatitude of every blessed is God alone. Reply to objection 2. End is twofold, namely objective and subjectively, as the philosopher says, namely the thing itself and its use. Thus, to a miser the end is money and its acquisition. Accordingly, God is indeed the last end of a rational creature, as the thing itself, but created beatitude is the end, and as the use, or the rather fruition of the thing. On the contrary, the beatitude of one is greater than that of another, according to, quote, 1 Corinthians 15:41, quote, stars differ from star in glory, end quote, but nothing is beyond greater than God. Therefore, beatitude is something different from God. I answer that. The beatitude of an intellectual nature, consists in an act of the will. In this, we may consider two things, namely the object of the act, which is the thing understood, and the act itself, which is to understand. If then beatitude be considered on the side of the object, God is the only beatitude, for every one is blessed from the sole fact that he understands God, in accordance with the saying of Augustine, quote, blessed is he who knoweth thee, though he knoweth not else, end quote. But as regards the act of understanding, beatitude is a created thing in beatified creatures. But in God, even in this way, it is an uncreated thing. Article 4. Whether all other beatitude is included in the beatitude of God. Objection 1. It seems that the divine beatitude does not embrace all other beatitudes, for there are some false beatitudes, but nothing false can be in God. Therefore, the divine beatitude does not embrace all other beatitudes. Reply to objection 1. A particular kind of beatitude is false, according as it falls short of the idea of true beatitude, and thus is not contained in God. But whatsoever semblance it has, howsoever slight, of beatitude, the whole of it preexists in divine beatitude. Objection 2. Further, a certain beatitude, according to some, consists in corporeal things, as in pleasure, riches, and such like, and none of these have to do with God, since he is incorporeal. Therefore, his beatitude does not embrace all other beatitudes. Reply to objection 2. The good that exists in corporeal things, in a corporeal manner, is also in God, but in a spiritual manner. We have now spoken enough concerning what pertains to the unity of the divine essence. On the contrary, beatitude is a certain perfection, but the divine perfection embraces all other perfections, as was shown above. Therefore, the divine beatitude embraces all other beatitudes. I answer that. Whatever is desirable, and whatsoever beatitude, whether true or false, preexists wholly and in a more eminent degree in the divine beatitude. As to the contemplative happiness, God possesses a continual and most certain contemplation of himself and of all things else, and as to that which is active, he has the governance of the whole universe. As to earthly happiness, which consists in delight, riches, power, dignity, and fame, according to Boethius, he possesses joy in himself and in things else for his delight. Instead of riches, he has the complete self-sufficiency, which is promised by riches. In place of power, he has omnipotence. For dignities, the government of all things. And in place of fame, he possesses the administration of all creatures. Well, thank you for joining me today, and we will continue tomorrow, beginning question 27. If you've enjoyed this, I hope you share it with a friend and that you find it spiritually beneficial. God bless you and have a good day.